Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Roshan Thiran's webinar series. We are here for Leadership for the 21st Century and Understanding Leadership in Today's World. And we have Roshan here. As you can see, he's pumped and ready to have this exciting webinar time with all of you. Okay, all right, on to you, Roshan.
Very good. So good afternoon, everyone. And constantly I'm speaking on leadership, right? So actually in the last probably 6, 7, or 8 webinars each Tuesday, I've not yet talked about leadership yet. We talked about crisis, we talked about coaching, we talked about different aspects of leadership, but not jumping directly into leadership. So today I thought I'll deep dive into understanding leadership for the 21st century and trying to truly understand what has really changed in terms of leadership. And as we zoom into this whole aspect of trying to understand how leaders are made and how leaders are born, to some extent. So maybe I'll start. It's I think on and off. I've started with this question. I'm going to start a little poll. Do you think great leaders are born? Are they through nature? You naturally are a leader, or is it something that you develop? Is it a genetic thing or is it a learned thing, right? So there's a quick poll I've opened up. If you can go to the poll section and answer what your thoughts are. Love to hear what you think, whether it's and if you're not sure, there's a not sure category also. So I see couple of born genetics, a couple of not sure, both, developed, learned. So I'll let the poll kind of take itself. Looks like most people believe it's developed or learned. I look at it now, it's about 70, almost it's about 70% who say that it's developed and learned. 72% now, it's waking up. And there's a couple of y'all who say about 20%, 25% say it's a both, right? And I'm going to close this so you guys can kind of have a look at that the data from that poll. But it's interesting, right? A couple of years ago, there's a scientist called Anders Ericsson who did some research, and what he found was relatively interesting. He found that generally, right, about 95% of the time, for a normal person, right? He did this research among geniuses, and he did a control group of normal people, right? And in his control group, he found that 95% of people actually learned leadership, or they learned a talent, or they learned how a skill or a capability. And about 5% of it was what we call genetic, where they had inherited a certain trait, or they inherited their height, which helped them in basketball, for example, or there was a certain thing that was genetic in element, right? So he said 5%, only 5% is genetic for a normal person, whereas for geniuses, about 15% is genetic, and about 85%, the bulk of it is actually learned. Right, even for geniuses, right, who can play the piano at the age of 2, like Mozart, or who can read at the age of 6 months, or so on and so forth, right? But this research was interesting to me for a different reason, because I was talking to a professor at IMD, which is a university or a business school in Switzerland, and we were saying, why isn't this research accepted by a lot of people? Because a lot of people still believe that the answer is 50-50, that 50% of you are genetic and 50% of you learned. Now, what's the difference between 50-50 versus 95-5? There's a big difference, right? Now, if it's 50-50, it means that 50% of who you are is luck, right? It's just by luck that 50% of you happened, right? But if it's 95% developed and 5% luck, so to say, or genetics, that means who you are today, right, is primarily your fault. Who you will be in 10 years' time, 95% is your fault. 5% is luck, right? So there is that element of genetic or luck. But generally speaking, most of who you are today, what you are as a person, is because you learned something, right? And we'll talk a little bit about that learning in the context of leadership in a little while. I want to start with this because I realize that many of us, when we come to say leadership, many of us come to say that leadership is, I don't have that leadership thing. I don't have that leadership trait. But when the research tells us clearly that leadership, right, is something that is learned. It's not something that you're born with. It's something that you develop. and you can continue to develop regardless of your age, right? So I want to start and make that clear up front, that leadership is something that we develop, right? So that's one of my first point. Now, let's go deeper, and I want to talk about three aspects of understanding leadership in today's world. So I'm going to talk about these three elements, one, two, and three, and then I'm going to dive into the science of how we can actually build leadership on a daily basis in our lives. Right now, if you have any questions, there's a Q&A tab. If you look on your right side, you'll see next to chat, there's a Q&A tab. So feel free anytime to jot out questions on the Q&A, and I'll be happy to answer them as we go along. And if I'm talking too fast, or if I'm, you think I can go faster and speed it up a little bit so that we can get a lot more done in the 45 minutes, just let me know, and I will speed along and go according to the pace that you kind of expect from me. Okay, so we're going to talk about three aspects of leadership, and then we're going to the science of how we create or develop leaders. And I'm going to end with a couple of key lessons. So that's kind of the game plan for today. Now I want to start by first aspect, right? The first aspect is when we study companies that are great, that became great, whether it's the Microsoft who was great under Bill Gates and then sort of tapered off under Ballmer and it's now reinventing itself under Satya, or Apple who was great whenever Jobs was running it, or Google today, or Samsung, or even GE for hundreds of years they were number one, right? Why did they become great? Now, if you really dig deep into the research behind these companies, and Jim Collins answers this, he says there is this good to great, there is built to last, and then he talks about actually companies, right? They have eras, right? And the eras are dictated by one thing and one thing alone, and the thing that always comes on is because of leaders, right? Leadership is the reason why nations like France at one point, or the Middle East with Saladin, or India with Gandhi, or NGOs like Mother Teresa did, or with Jack Welch with business, and so on and so forth, right? We see countries, we see companies, we see NGOs, we see organizations, we see societies, we see communities, right? They thrive because of a great leader, and they fall because of leadership, which came up, John Maxwell talks about this, right? Everything rises and falls on leadership. And so we know that, leadership is a reason why organizations and nations and other things fall or rise. And we see that with empires, right? Certain empires do great, but it boils down ultimately to the leaders that led, right? And the succession they created, right? And so we know leadership is a big reason. But when we ask this question, what is leadership? Tell me, what is leadership? What we get is very interesting. And maybe I'll pose this question to you, right? If you kind of ask yourself, what really is leadership? If you can tell me what would be a trait of a great leader, I know you say a leader needs to be visionary. All leaders have vision. Write down in the chat what you think are traits of a leader. Leader needs to influence. The leader needs to what? Well, just go down to the chat and just put down what you think are great aspects of leadership that you think that really differentiates great leadership from normal leadership, or what we call mediocre, or just so Bernard, yes, leadership is influence, charisma, Kafung, I see able to influence, yes, a lot of these things. So what would be those traits, right? So I notice a couple of you are writing stuff in still. Some are typing in, bringing people to the next level. Thanks, Sofian. Felicia, leaders need to have empathy, and you're all right, and so if I continue this dialogue, you'll write things like this, you need to have influence, we need to the vision, we need to be bold, we need to have wisdom, we need to be sensitive, generous, punctual, and so on and so forth, right? There's a ton of things that you will write, and you'll come up with all these different things, right? Motivator, and you're all right, right? And so this is the big problem with leadership. The leadership industry today, it's $92 billion that are spent on leadership development across the world. So we've got 92 billion, but what did they do? They teach you how to have vision. They teach you how to listen better. They teach you to be persuasive or drive change. They teach you to be generous. They teach you to be dependable or responsible, or take accountability, or to have wisdom, or to empower and execute and to talk. And how many courses on presentation skills and how to communicate better and so on and so forth, right? So, $92 billion is spent on building leaders, yet the number one issue in many companies, right, is this lack of leaders, lack of great leaders, right? And it's so funny, right? Because a lot of organizations spends billions of dollars or millions of dollars on leadership development. Yet the biggest problem we have in society as a general is lack of leaders. Look at the US, right? This leadership issue that they have, and not just US, right? I mean, here in Malaysia, we have huge political leadership issues, not and across the board, really, really, really mediocre leaders at best, right? And if you look at them, right, and we say, but they learn all these leadership skills, right? And so maybe I should ask the question slightly differently, and maybe I should ask, so what do you think is more important for a leader, right? To talk or to listen? Which do you think is more important for a leader? And go ahead in the chat. Which is more important, to talk or to listen, right? I'll give you guys a few seconds, to kind of put that out. Which is more important, talk or listen? And then my second question, which is more important for a leader? So a lot of you say listening, right? Okay, great. Which is more important for a leader? For you to be big picture visionary, or execution, getting into the details and getting things done? Which is more important? For vision, that big picture vision, or execution, getting things done, right? That's my second question, right? So I realize a lot of I see many are visionary. Some of you saying equal. Lots of visionary coming in. Okay, maybe my third question: which is more important for a leader? A leader must fight and persevere, or they must quit and give up? Which is more important? To fight, to persevere, never give up, or the other option is to give up and to cut their losses, or whatever you want to call it? Which is more important? Right? And I noticed some of you just now, were vision, and now some of you have, maybe it's both. So we've got Zelina, you're saying fight, fight and persevere. You see, this is very interesting, right? When we talk about leadership, right, the answer, right, to the question, and most of you say fight and persevere, right? Leswan says it is situational, right? And I think the answer is right. No, the answer is actually situational, right? The answer is both. You need to be very good at talking, right? But you also must be very good at listening. It's not I must do half listen and half talk. I must be very good at listening, but I must also know when to be very good and shut up and listen more. I must be very good at talking, but I must also learn to listen. I must be very good at big picture vision, but I also must learn when to stop the visioning stuff and get into details and get into execution. I must also have the capability of knowing when to quit sometimes, right? I mean, we've got people, right, like our former prime minister, who doesn't know when to quit, right? So there is need to know when to give up and when to keep fighting, and it's very situational. And I'm always reminded by this story. Many years ago, I was working in TV, and I had to do the obituary for Mother Teresa when I was doing that. And one of the things I learned was this story about Mother Teresa, how she used to go out every day and ask for free food. And it's very interesting because one day she went to ask this Indian baker and say, "Sir, can I have free food?" And she was very polite and asked in a very nice and very humble way. But the baker saw this white woman, and she said, "I don't know why this woman is asking me for free food." And he got very angry and he slapped her, gave her one tight slap, pum, on her face. And she got, whoa, why am I getting this slap, right? And now you think about it, what would you do, right? If you were in Mother Teresa's situation, you had humbly asked and say, "I'm taking care of these kids, and I'm from here, and I'm asking you, please donate some food so I can take to these kids," and then you get a tight slap. What would you do, right? And I know many people, when I ask this question, and feel free to answer if you many people is like, I will be like Gandhi, and I will show the other side, slap this side now. Okay, maybe some other person will say, "Oh, I'm gonna slap that guy back. How could he slap me? I didn't do anything wrong," right? And some people say, "I'll just go away and ask somebody else," right? Now, all these three solutions, if you slap somebody back, would you get your food? If you ask him to slap the other side, would you get your food? If you leave the restaurant, would you get your food? The answer would be no. Most likely, you won't get your food. But Mother Teresa did something very interesting. She put her hand there and said, "Sir, thank you for this slap. In a very humble way, I deserve it. I know I shouldn't be asking for free food, but I need the food. You better give me my food. My poor kids need the food. And you better please give me the food now. I will never leave you, bum." He slapped her again. And again, he said, "Sir, thank you so much for the slap. I deserved it. But now you better give me a food." And the third slap came, and she did the same thing. And guess what? He got so angry. and he decided to take so much food, and he said, woman, nah, take this food, get out of here. I don't want to see your face. Take food, get out of here, please. Just get out of here. She got her food. And as I was reading the story, right, I said, wow, how did Mother Teresa learn how to be humble and assertive together at the same time, but in the right order, right? And I couldn't quite interview her because she's just passed away, and it was her obituary. I mean, it was her funeral that we were preparing for, and so it was interesting that I started to think about this, and I realized that this is one big aspect of leadership that we take for granted. And what is this? We tend to think, right, that skills are important. All these skills are important. But I can teach you all these skills. I can teach you how to listen. I can teach you how to talk. I can teach you how to be executing and so on and so forth. I can teach you all these skills. But what we cannot teach you in leadership is when to use those skills. And what Mother Teresa did was very simple. She probably went through life in the early part, getting slapped and slapping back, and probably doing things wrong. And she had the skill of talking. She had the skill of listening. She had the skill of being humble. But she also had the skill of being assertive. But she didn't know when to use those skills. And because she started making those mistakes, she started to learn a very important lesson. And to me, that lesson is this, that you need to know when to use the right skill. There is sometimes, and I look at 20 situations, leadership behavior. You can be humble, but sometimes you cannot be humble, You know what you must do? You must be assertive. And sometimes, if you're humble, people will run you down. And there's need for you to say, no, humility is great, but this time I need to be assertive. That's what Mother Teresa did. Now, what we need to do, we need to be 100% good at being assertive. We need to be 100% good at being humble. Leadership is about two extremes, But I need to be good at both extremes. So what we do in our company is we teach people big picture, and we teach people how to execute. But what we don't teach is when to execute. And that is very important. When to execute. But how do we get to know when to execute? You learn how to execute by context. You learn how to execute situationally. And you learn how to execute when those things encounter. So you may have gone for a training program how to be assertive. And if you're assertive all the time, you're going to fail. Because at some point, you need to stop being assertive and being humble. If you're so good at big picture, and you're big picture all the time, okay, that's great. But someday your CFO will start to steal money from you and run away because you're not detail-oriented enough. And so I looked at 20 different dimensions, and there's more. There's more, as I started looking at it, I realized there's many more dimensions to leadership, right? So I looked at leadership behavior. You can be humble, you can be assertive, but you also can take the leadership approach. I need to be visionary. That's great. You all said everybody needs to be visionary. But at some point, we need to be detail-oriented also. Leaders need to be bold, but we need to know when to stop and when to go there and when to go back. And it's a two-way process. I must be here, but I also must be here. But I need to know when. Sometimes I need to use influence. Sometimes I don't care. I had a very interesting question from an employee. He said, you've changed in the last 3 months. You become very authoritative. You don't care. You say, I don't care. We're getting this done. I said, yeah, we're in a crisis. And in a crisis, I got no time to say, what is your view? What is your view? What is your view? I sat down with Hui Ming, my co-founder. I said, we decided this thing. And we said, let's go. And there's a time to use authority. There's a time to use influence. But you need to know when. In a crisis, when the ship is sinking, you don't say, hey, let's get consensus and let's sing Kumbaya and let's all figure it out together. We don't have time. The ship is sinking. You do this, you do this, you do this. Right? But when times are good and we have the opportunity to empower, we have the opportunity to grow and develop, that's great. Sometimes you need to use your gut, your street smart. Sometimes you need to use research. Sometimes you need to have deep dive into data to help us drive things. But you need to know when to do that. And this is the power of leadership, right? And this is very important. Time for self. How you use your time. Sometimes leaders use all the time is for the community, or all the time is for the organization. But then you have no time for yourself. You need to recharge. You need to reflect. And reflection is a key part of leadership, right? But there's more, right? I told you have 20 different pieces, and I'll send you these slides after this so you guys can look at this. Sometimes it's important for process or discipline, but sometimes the creativity is needed where you need to throw process out the door, or you need to manage process. But you need to know when, and that's the approach to problem solving. But there's also what we call our personal orientation. Sometimes we are task oriented, but sometimes we need to be people oriented. Sometimes we need to leverage our strengths, but sometimes we need to develop strength, or we may do it both together. And we need to swing. Like I said, leadership is about swinging between two extremes. And this is what many people forget. They forget that leadership sometimes is about showing love, but sometimes you got to use fear. Sometimes it's the carrot, sometimes it's the stick. But that's why great leaders, you can't nail them down. Oh, this guy, you know, usually the guys you say are great leaders and they're always showing love. And some people call that tough love, right? They try to understand what the other side is. They call it tough love. But basically, you show love, you show 100% love. But when you drive and say, look, the reality is not really using fear, right? It's really about being. This is the wrong word, right? I think the better word is being candid and being transparent and showing reality, right? Is using reality, right? So I got to fix my own things and see I'm learning while I'm talking to you. Sometimes you use data, sometimes intuition. Sometimes you need to be extroverted to get things done. Sometimes you need to be introverted. And it's about reflection and interactions. It's about perfection is not needed all the time. Sometimes you need speed. You need to get to some form of execution and some form of speed. And sometimes you need to be telling stories. And sometimes you need to be using data. So leadership, right, is not about one aspect. It's about two different extremes, right? And it's not just about one piece. And the things I talked about, quitting or pursuing excellence, teaching others, learning from others, doing yourself, delegating, learning from mistakes, doing it right the first time. Sometimes you have to do things right the first time. Sometimes you can learn from mistakes, right? And so sometimes it's about experimenting. No, I show you this to tell you that it's multifaceted. It's not one thing, right? And so the key part of understanding the first point I want to talk about the aspect of leadership is that leadership is contextual. So if anyone tells you that leadership is about 10 steps or 7 this or 5 this, they're not telling you the truth, right? Because leadership, why is leadership contextual? Leadership is contextual because essentially, right, depending on your goals, my goal is to be the CEO of Sime Darby, but my goal could be something else, to be the best father. My goal could be, to make sure my team succeeds. And because everybody's goal is different, right? That means what we need to learn to get to that goal is different, which means the skills that we need are different, which means what we need to execute is different, which means my situations become different, which means what I need to execute in those situations become different. And so anyone that tells you if you do these 4 things, you'll be successful as a leader, that's not true. But what is true is that the process of leadership remains the same, and leadership is contextual. So that's number 1. Now, the second aspect I want to talk about leadership, and let me set this up. So, the world is changing. We know that, right? And we know the world of the change that's happening in the 4th industrial revolution is not just a physical change or a biological or a digital change. It's actually all 3 combined, right? We've got 3D printing, autonomous vehicles, we've got genome mapping projects, we have the predictive medicine, and now with IoT, blockchain, all these things, right? It's all happening intertwined with each other, right? And on top of that, we have COVID, right? Where everything is becoming digital, where how we engage the customer, how we employ employees, how we optimize operations, and how we transform products, everything's becoming more and more digital. So with all that, right, we realize that context is changing. So leadership is contextual, but guess what? The context is changing, right? So when we understood the first part is that, hey, leadership is situational, it's very dependent on the context. But then we need to understand the second part is the context is changing. So what does that mean for leadership, right? And I want to talk about this in terms of just this leadership piece. So a lot of things are changing, right? Competition is changing. Technology is not just incremental, it's exponential. Organizational structures are becoming networks, right? Networks, so it's almost matrix. And it's very hard sometimes for me to explain to my own employees and say, hey, don't you understand? We are now a network, right? Everybody is intertwined, right? And people are doing multiple stuff. But all those things are happening. When we talk about leadership, right? One of the biggest power of leader previously, right, is that the context that they lived in was that they had a context of the leader always had the most information, right? So remember the context in the 1980s and the 1990s was information was power. Whoever had the most information was the most powerful person of all, right? So it's all about information. And what does information do? Information actually makes us what we call a manager, a supervisor, because I have the most information. Everybody gives me all this information. I'm then able to take the information and make decisions better. I become a decision maker. I become a delegator. I become the ultimate authority for everything. right? Because ultimately, you don't know everything. Only I know because I get information from everywhere. And so I know most, right? But what's happened in the last 5 to 10 to 15 years is that we've had information overload. Everybody has access to every kind of information. So what has happened? The world has equalized and said that because of the information democratization, the context of leadership has changed significantly. Because as a leader, my old role was I'm the boss because I've got the most information and I make the best decisions. But today, I may not necessarily have the most information. Why? Because business has become very complex. Every industry has become more and more complex. The supply chain is complex. The industry is complex. The way to sell is complex. The go-to-market strategy is complex. The business model becomes more complex. Everything becomes more complex. And so as a leader, especially if I'm running multiple, and that's why you see companies like GE don't succeed, because you have multiple industry. And for one guy to understand all these industries and the permutations is impossible, right? And so what has happened is leadership now is not about managing information, because that was the previous context. Now it's about knowing that the information is available to everybody, and your job is to facilitate and say, okay, we know everybody has access to information. How can I be an advisor to you? How can I be a coach to you? How can I be a role model to you? How can I be a facilitator and enabler to you so that you take all this information, you already have access to it, but help you to make the right decision? Right? So you change from becoming a hierarchy. See, previously leader up here and then hierarchy, another one, another leader, another one, and so on. You have this hierarchy. But today, right, it's a very different change, right? Because today the leader is down here and the leader is saying, how can I support you? And here are all the teams, and the teams have all these people, and I am here to support you. And in fact, the last couple of years, I changed my title. My title is no more leader. My title now is coolie, right? I mean, so those of you who know what's happening in Leaderonomics, right? My title is coolie, and so my job is to serve the business leaders, right, of the different businesses, because I'm no more a decision maker. I don't make any decisions anymore, right? They make decisions. I may make vision. I set up vision. Again, it's about vision, right? It's about setting the big vision. It's about enabling and then being able to align and create clarity in how I do that, right? So that's the big second change, is that really because of what has changed is that we need to understand, right, and have clarity, is that the leadership context or the paradigm has changed. So number one is leadership is contextual, but number two is the context has changed, and now we need to replicate that context, right? And so, if you have any questions, feel free to ask me or challenge me if you think I'm wrong. But I'm sharing with you what I see it's what's happening now in Malaysia and India and some of our countries in ASEAN. We don't see this because our leaders are still acting in a very hierarchical way. They still think they have access to the most information, and they still want to make all decisions and create these bottlenecks. But at some point in time, it creates more and more bottlenecks. It slows down the process, and they cannot compete because companies are going faster and faster. It's not that they are going faster and faster. It's just that there's no more bottleneck of leadership. And leadership has moved to be advisory, to be coach, to be facilitator. So that's number two, right? That's the second big part of what's happening in leadership. Now, number three, and I'm going to ask you this question, right? Very simple, right? And this is number three. Above all, the most important aspect of leadership. So we understand leadership is contextual. We understand that context has changed and created a new leadership paradigm because of the information revolution that has happened. Now, the third part is above all, this is the most important part of leadership. Above all, leader must be what? One word. A leader must be what? Answer in your chat. A leader must be what? Visionary, must be humble. It's one word. So fill in the blanks. And if you answer right, I'll ask Andrea, our program manager, to give you a special copy of a book that we have called a physical copy of the book, not just a digital copy. A leader must be versatile, yes, energetic, purposeful, follower, clear. Okay. I think we have a winner. Lai Ching has got a prize, right? So Lai Ching, go to Andrea after this and claim your prize, right? A leader must be clear. Now, this is the hardest thing to do, right? I just saw a quote, the most difficult thing is to be simple. I saw this quote today, So the above all, a leader must be clear. And why is this very hard? Now, clarity, yes, absolutely, right? So some late answers are coming in. Yes, clarity is the key, right? and it's the hardest thing in leadership. And this is what you see many times. A leader has a vision and say this is the vision, and what happens is the employees take the vision and they drive it. But what they do is they interpret that vision based on their own understanding, their own lenses, right? And what happens is because of their lenses, they start to say, okay, this is what the leader actually means, right? And so they start to translate that vision. Now, 3 months go by and the leader's like, hey, wait, I never said that. No, no, you said all this. I said, no, but what I meant was this. And then we say, oh my goodness, right? What? You guys, I told you this. Why are you doing this? But that's what that means, right? And this happens all the time. Alignment, right? Okay, so I know Ignatius, you asked me, alignment is what clarity means. That means everyone is going right or left or not or south together. What happens in many companies, everybody's working very hard, but one person is going right, one person is left, one person is not, one person south, one's east, one's west, and all kinds of things are happening, right? But to be very clear is very hard. To be very simple is very tough, right? It's the toughest thing in leadership is to have clarity. And I'm going to offer you 3 clarities that you would need for your team if you are a leader, right? Now, the first clarity is what I call vision clarity. That means you have to have the vision crystal clear. Now, in Leaderonomics for 12 years, right, we have had the same vision. And our vision is very simple. Our job is to, we call this a GBT, right? Grow people into leaders, build communities of love, and transform the nation. So we say, hey, here's how we do grow people into leaders, here's how we do build communities, and here's how we do transform our nation, right? Now, for us to achieve our vision, we need to have understanding of where we are. So every year we say, okay, we are here. And this was 2007 when we first started the company, we are here. But today is 2020, and 2020 we're actually here. And because we are here, our mission, which is the third thing, right? So reality clarity, number 2. The mission, right? Last time our mission is from here to here, but we hit here. Now our mission is from KR1, or let's say KR2. Our mission is from KR2 to KR3. KR3 is key results, right? So now if your mission is here, right? So my mission is here today. That means I need to re-clarify my mission. It's no more the old mission. So today, Leaderonomics, our mission is very simple. Is to optimize learning engagement in organizations and in communities. So we have a new mission, and this is what we need to do to achieve. And as we go on and do what we do, slowly we will achieve our vision. Now, everyone in my company needs to understand what our vision is. Everyone needs to understand that today our reality is here. We're in 2020, and the 2020 result is here. When we started our company, it was 2007 or 8, right? And we are here, okay? Now we've moved here, and so everyone has that same reality clarity. And so because we are here, today our mission is optimizing learning engagement in organizations and communities. Okay, so if we understand, and each of you will have your same the same thing. I think if you can get these 3 things right, vision clarity, reality clarity, and mission clarity, we have got at least some way to the third part of what I talked about, clarity. So it starts with, number 1, it starts with understanding that leadership is contextual and leadership is extreme. It's not about knowing the trait, it's about practicing the trait so that you know when, depending on the situation, you can execute well. That's number 1. Number 2 is the context has changed, right? And so leadership has also morphed somewhat, right? And number 3 is that we know that the most important part of leadership is clarity. And there are 3 clarities that we need to have for our teams. Vision clarity, what's the vision for the team? What's the reality for the team? And what's the mission, which is today, what do we need to focus on? Because the vision is long-term. The vision is the next 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, you're going to get there, right? But today, in this next year, what do we need to do to get to where we want to get to? Okay? Now, Felicia has a quick question. Based on your experience, how do you convince top management to move from the old leadership structure to the new one? Very good one. So this is based on number 2, right? That I talked about is, at some point in time, what happens is 2 things will happen. One is they themselves will come to this realization. And I'm talking to many, many leaders, right? And when I talk to them, hey, come on, don't you think managing your team is very hard now? Yeah, they don't listen to me. Okay, why don't they listen to you? I don't know. They don't respect me. Why don't they respect you? Because you are not adding any value. Because you are telling them what they already know. And why would they respect you for telling them what they know? They already have access to the information. If you want to earn the respect, what you need to do is be a coach, be a facilitator, And many of the I do one-on-one coaching with a lot of CEOs, right? And the ones that I'm on retainer with a couple, right? So the ones that I do, right, we have this conversation all the time, and for them it's big eye opener. They say, yeah, it's true. I had power in information, and so I sometimes hoard information. But now I realize information is free. Why am I hoarding information? Let me just give it away, right? So Felicia, one is they will come to the realization themselves. The second one is they won't. And what will happen is the company will start to go into crisis. And when the company goes into crisis, they suddenly will realize that they're not capable anymore. And they will get to their kids or whatever. Lah. And after a while, they will exit off the leadership scene. And new leaders will come on board lah, that understand this new norm. Lah. So either way, they're going to lose, right? If they don't get it. So if they get it now, great. If they don't, ultimately, they will lose everything they've built. And that will create some urgency for them to want to let go. Lah. So there's no clear answer, but that's the best I can answer at this point in time. So number 1, 2, and 3, right? So those are the aspects of leadership. Now I want to very quickly for the next 10 minutes talk a little bit about the science of building leaders. This is a framework that we've developed in Leaderonomics over the last couple of years. And what we found is that why there are two aspects, what we call individual issues, why people cannot change. And this to your question, Felicia, you say, why these leaders, some leaders cannot change? Well, sometimes they have individual things that are stopping them. Sometimes in their own company, right? If you're a team manager, you cannot change because there's some organizational issues that are stopping you from changing. I'm not going to talk about organization issues today. I'm going to create, we have another thing called SOTO, the science of transforming organizations. That's another webinar that's coming up in the next couple of weeks, right? So if you check webinar.roshanthiran.com, you'll be able to find the schedule and you can sign up for that webinar down the road. But for now, I'm going to talk a little bit about individual constraints. And we call that the science of building leaders, right? And the science of building leaders is very simple. It's essentially what we call, there is what we call foundational leadership or formative leadership. There's what we call emerging leadership, and ultimately there's what we call executing leadership. And what we find, right, in these different aspects, right, is that in these different areas, right, what is very important, right, is that there is where and here's what's very important, right? In each aspect, there is okay. So let me talk very briefly. What happens to you as a leader is that your leadership is actually a developing process. When you're young, right, you have what we call character that's developed. Now, you may have developed moral character, but there's also another form of character called performance character. And there's another form of character called worldview character, or what we call intellectual character, right? Now, these are formed because of your parents, because of the things that you do. I joined Scouts, so I learned how to tahan, or we call grit. I learned self-control. I did this and I learned this. And so what happened is you form character. And at some point in time, this character actually finalizes. And at some point in time, you create what we call values. And over time, you start to embed your values as a leader into the organization. And there's an alignment between organization values and your values. But at the formation of it is character. So we need to get character right, because if you get character wrong, your motivation is also wrong, right? Your motivation is wrong because character ultimately determines motivation. I'll give you an example. Mother Teresa, we talked about her, right? And Adolf Hitler, both supposedly were great leaders. They managed to influence many people to follow them. Now, why was one a great leader, Mother Teresa, and the other one a scorned upon leader, Adolf Hitler? Because motivation, because of character. One's character was a character of revenge. Revenge was a big part of the value. Somebody did something wrong to them, so my job was to get revenge. So I became a leader because I wanted to get revenge and exterminate somebody, and so on and so forth, right? Now, Mother Teresa was driven by giving because her parents were hospitable, and she had this moral character of giving. But she supplemented the moral character with performance character of knowing how to, of being able to become a leader. And it was driven by motivation, driven by character to give, right? And so that character determined her motivation, that ultimately determined what we call her vision, right? And her vision usually is transpired by something bad happened to you. Many of us, our vision is when something bad happened to you, you say, because of your character and because of something bad, you suddenly have this thing, that's injustice. Let me solve this injustice and let me fight against the government. Let me do this, let me do that. And this is translated by what we call crucible moments, right? Your crucible moments drives your character, right? And ultimately, this drives what we call vision, right? Developing a vision comes from character plus crucible ultimately get you to the vision. So it's intertwined, right? Now, at the same time, we have what we call influence, right? And influence, right, is highly dictated by what we call secure base. Secure base is early influences in our life that gave you, like your parents. Your parents were one of your early secure base, right? They told you that you go ahead. We are there. We are your safety harness. But go ahead. You must explore. You must try new things. Now, maybe for me, right, one of the biggest formative secure base I had in my life was my football coach, a guy called Mokhtar Dahari. Now, he was a very famous football player, but what he did was he was my secure base, convincing me you can be good, you can be a great footballer. But I was the lousiest footballer in the team. No, you can. You're young. Don't worry. You work hard, push yourself. You can do anything you want, right? And he pushed me. So it was not just inspiring you, but also pushing you, making you run 100 laps, making you do extra 1,000 push-ups, making you work extra hard, and making you feel that hard work is positive, right? And so what happens is secure base is not just caring, they also dare. So we always say it's care and dare, right? They care for you, but they dare. And also, right, we realize that if you don't have these secure bases, what happens? Your boss can be your first boss. It's a good secure base. Later, right, if you don't have these secure bases, you won't be a good leader. You won't then teach. Because a big part of leadership is teaching others, right? And if you don't teach others, they cannot be successful for you. If you don't mentor others, your team cannot be successful, right? And of course, each of it, right, self-awareness, and so on and so forth. Now, many times people always talk about leadership based on this. How can I develop competency? And competency is the skills, right? The influencing, the vision, all these are skills, right? But this is highly dictated by your vision. What's your vision, right? What's your vision? Now, if you understand what your vision, then you're able to say, okay, here's my vision. Once I figure out what's my vision, right? Okay, here's my vision for myself. Then I develop the right skills to execute my vision. Once I develop the vision for my organization, then I redevelop the right skills and intellect and also the functional competence to be able to execute my vision. So it's all interrelated, but it's very important. So I give you this framework, and if you go to leaderonomics.com, you can get much more information on the science of building leaders. But this is important for you to understand that leadership is a process. So I talked about leadership. Number one is contextual. Number two, the context is changing, right? And the situations are changing. And number three, leadership is about clarity. But the fourth part, I said, remember at the start, I said leadership is developed. 95% is developed, 5% is genetic. The development process is this process. You need to take, and what it requires, right, is for you to do a couple of things, is a learning process, You see, most of us start in this, we all think we are very good leaders. And this is what we call unconscious incompetence. Anyone when they're young, right, they think they know everything. Come on, I know how to do that. Many times I'm like, I'm a great leader, I've done this, I've done that. But they're in this process of unconscious incompetence. They don't know they're incompetent. And then suddenly they start working for 1 or 2 years. My goodness, I don't know anything. They reach this point of conscious incompetence. My goodness. I'm consciously aware that I'm stupid, right? And then we go to a point where we are conscious, okay, I'm learning those skills. And now I'm conscious that I'm quite good at this now, but I'm not so good at that, right? I'm conscious of my incompetence, but I'm also conscious of what I'm competent in. But then you come to a point, right, where you are unconscious of your competence. Sometimes I don't realize this, like I've been dabbling in tech from in late 90s, right? Setting up email servers and so on. And I always felt incompetent in technology. I'm not a tech guy. But then I suddenly realized, actually, when I'm unconsciously competent in technology, because many of my employees, you're a tech guy. I'm like, I thought I'm a leadership guy. But I have this unconscious competence of knowing tech and being able to understand tech quick, right? But the real test is what I talked about just now. The best leaders are teachers. And that goes back to us. And that's where you unconsciously can teach stuff. So when I can unconsciously teach tech or leadership and so on, then I can say, I am now seriously at a level 5 leadership competence, right? Which draws me to the next few things I want to talk about. I want to ask you, how many of you like to learn? How many of you like to learn? Put up your hand. Those who like to learn. Let's put up your hand. So maybe not put up your hand, but maybe go to the chat and say, yes, I love to learn, right? If you can put up just briefly on the chat, I love to learn, or I don't like to learn, or whatever you may think is the right answer to the question. If you can go ahead and do that right now. those of you who say you like to learn, right? You are serial liars. And here's why. You know what learning is? Learning is a change that happens in you. Change in belief, a change in mindset, a change in capability, a change in something. But most of us, right, who say, yes, I force, okay, maybe Bernard, you say you force yourself to learn. I think that's the right answer. You force yourself to learn because learning is actually what we call change, right? Because when learning is change, right? Change, nobody likes to change. Only a wet baby likes to change its diapers. Most of us, right? Change is very hard. It doesn't come natural because naturally we will avoid change because change is painful. At least the first few weeks of change. But once we master change, then we love it. Because once we become, and I go back to this, remember the model I said, level 1 is we are unconsciously incompetent. That means we don't even know and then we go to conscious competent. When you become consciously about your incompetence, this is where you say, I am consciously aware I'm not good at swimming. It's going to be very hard. Now, when you come to this level, this is where you realize the pain to learn. And when you want to get to the conscious competent level, which is level 3, that's when you say, ayo, so painful, so painful, so painful. How am I going to learn? It's so painful, it's so painful, it's so painful, right? And you avoid learning. So sometimes you say, ayo, I have to go for class. I don't feel like going. But you reach level 4 when you are unconsciously competent, when you are competent but you don't even aware, that's when you love learning. I love learning, right? So actually, learning is tough in level 1 to 3, but once you get to level 4, you love learning because especially for the space you're in, because technically you're reaching expertise level of learning, right? And change, yes, Mazwani, your question exactly. Change is flexible at a later stage, right? We become flexible to change when we constantly change, right? It's a process, right? If you don't constantly change, and I realized tech is like that. No, I realized when I'm young, I started to just change all the time. And so now when somebody throws something tech to me, I'm like, that's it. Okay, let me figure it out. Let's figure out Big Marker. Let's figure out Zoom. Let's figure out all the tech. No problem, because there's flexibility to it. So your quick question, I saw that on the chat, Mazwani. Let me try and answer that. Okay, now I I see your question, Karupia, on millennials. I'll take that in a bit. Okay, let me just finish this thought now, right? Now, because remember, I said the ultimate way to learn, right, or to be a leader is to teach. Remember, ultimately, if you get to that level 5 competence, which is to teach or to coach, right? When you can coach others, that's where you're at level 5. Unconscious competence, right? And that's where you are a teacher. You're really teaching the stuff, right? Most of us like to do level 1, which is listening. So you remember about 10%. I listened to the webinar by Roshan. You haven't. You see, I saw him. No, that's 20%. I'm practicing. Okay, that's great. That's 70% learning. But when you teach, that's when you really, really build your leadership capability. And what you have to remember, and I keep telling you this, skills, you can learn skills, which is what the Mother Teresa story is about. I can learn skills. But for you to gain confidence is where you need to practice, where you need to contextualize it, which is the second thing I told you. You need to contextualize a new context, and you need to understand that you need to have clarity, you need to have practice, you need to learn. And that's where the confidence comes, because for you to execute well, it's not just knowledge, it's not just skills, it's about getting confidence. So a lot of people got skills, but why Malaysia productivity very low? Why are employees so useless? I mean, to be very honest, if you take a real honest look at Malaysia, we're very knowledgeable, we're very skillful. But where's the confidence to execute at world-class levels? And that's why we're never going to be world-class, right? We need to have that confidence. And that's why leadership is paramount, right? It's not just to have that skill, but to have that expertise. And you can only do that when you have that absolute confidence to execute. So with that, right, I want you to say that there are 3 things that are very important: learn, unlearn, and change, right? And to me, I think if we get this right, the rest of the things will come. Understanding context, right? That understanding that context is changing. And number 3, understanding that clarity is key. The key of all this is to be able to learn. And I think the illiterate of the 20, I love this quote by Alvin Toffler, right? The illiterate of the 21st century will not those who cannot read and write, but those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn. And so with that, I'll leave you with 3 things. You must keep learning and growing. But you can learn by doing stuff. That's the only way to learn. You have to experience. You have to accumulate many, many experiences. Like Mother Teresa, context is changing. So you need to understand what the context is, but you need to navigate the context by doing in that context, by teaching in that context, by learning in that context. And the only way to do that is get feedback. Ask your bosses, tell me what's wrong. It's okay. We hate feedback, because feedback is very negative. But we want to get that feedback. We want to get more and more of that feedback. And lastly, is that piece that many of you talked about, flexibility, that change, right? We need to get new skills. We need to embrace technology. We need to understand. And I think if we can get these three right, the experience, the feedback, and the skills, right, we will position ourselves to succeed as a leader for the 21st century. So with that, right, I'm going to try and answer your questions as much as I can. So I've answered Felicia's question. Let me get to a couple more questions. I see. Let me see. I see, Karupia, your question is how to accommodate the leadership to this leadership to new millennials. It seems there's a gap to influence them, and they seem not to follow. I think there's two things, right? So one of the things is the new guys, the new kids, right? They're coming in, right? They didn't have to go through the same experiences that the people like me had to, right? We had to fight to get a scholarship. If the Malaysian government, in my case, they didn't give me a scholarship, I had to go out and ask companies, and I have to ask the US, I have to ask countries to give me scholarships. And I managed to get a scholarship to go to the US and so we had to fight. And when US, I had to work, I had to do this. So when we come out, we've accumulated a lot of experiences because of the things we were forced to do. Now, because the kids these days are a little bit more entitled to this stuff, right? They haven't accumulated the experience to understand context. So when you are in level one, what is level one? You're unconscious, right? You are unconscious of your incapability, or you're unconscious about your competence. Yeah? And so you have no consciousness that you're no good, right? Or you don't have consciousness to learn about leadership, or you don't have consciousness to go through the pain of learning, or you don't have the consciousness to realize that you need to do that, right? How are you able to then develop yourself? Remember, we said 95% of you is developed. Now, if 95% of you is developed, and you don't think you need to be developed, you think you're already there, how are you going to develop yourself? So we have to work with the millennials to say, hey guys, you must understand that if you don't learn, right, your career is like that. You're going to learn, you've learned a bit, but now you're not learning, right? And so over time, right, you are like this, you're plateau. Now, if you have to keep learning. You have to keep learning. You have to keep changing. And the only way to keep learning and changing is for you to keep doing stuff, new stuff, right? And it's our role as leaders, right, to explain this to the new generation, to understand that it's an importance to know that, hey, you are a level one leader, which is not just are you incompetent, you're unconscious of your incompetence, right? You need to move to level two where you're conscious of your incompetence, and then move to level three where then you become consciously competent, or some form of competence that you have, right? And so if we can help these people to get to this level, right, then we have at least halfway through the battle of working with these millennials, right? So, that's there. I want to go to the next question, which is from Kai Fong. Extroverted has been perceived as one of the traits for leadership and is typically apparent when applied to the military. I don't think so. No, conservative and introvert with socially inept make a great leader. When you if you look at the latest book by Jim Collins, right, and he talked about Built to Last, and the next book, right, he talks about the most competent leaders. Most of them seem to be very introverted in nature. But they learned how to be extroverted at certain times. Remember, I told you it's about two extremes. Extroversion and introversion is two extremes. Now, what will happen is introverts tend to reflect a lot. We tend to reflect. But what we tend to do is we tend to think, right? Extroverts do things. One of the things they do well is they like to not, they like to talk, right? They like to talk and quickly take action. So extroverts like, oh, let me do it. I'll take care of it. Even if they're not capable, they will say, I can do it. Let me do it. And they will just talk, and they do lah. They talk, and then they will try and execute. Now, most of the time they fail, but people give them credit because they are the risk takers, right? Now, what we need to learn as introverts, right, is to say, okay, I think, which is very good, but then I also need to do, right? Extroverts need to stop talking and doing so fast. So you see a typical extrovert, I say like car, suddenly a car is a tire puncher. And the extrovert drives by, they see the car, right? They quickly go there and fix the tire puncher. But actually, that's not the problem with the car. No, the problem is something else. But they already starting to fix the tire. Hey, wait! I didn't ask you to fix, or they already decided, right? In their mind, I need to take action, right? I don't care. action is better than no action, right? Now introverts will say, let's explore this, let's think about this, let's we take our time to explore. But what we need to do is, yes, do that, but also learn to do. And this is what I call it. We need to move lah. We need to be a bit like extroverted, but we need to also use our strength. Our strength is our introversion, it's our reflection, it's our ability to think through things, right? Extroverted need to stop doing so fast, think a bit. They need to learn introversion, right? So I don't agree that it's extroverted or introverted. I think it's a combination of being able to do both, right? And I think that's how we need to manage this lah. Is we need to realize that leadership is about two extremes. I need to be very good as an introvert. I also need to be very good. Now, many introverts, I know one of my old bosses, he was an extreme introvert, but he learned how to be one of the best presenters. And when you present, everybody like, wow, they all thought he's an extrovert. No? But after he presented, he always say, Roshan, you go and have your drink. I cannot. I have to go home to my room and just absorb because I'm an introvert. And after a talk like this, I cannot tahan. I cannot, I cannot control myself. I need to go and sit in the room and be by myself and just let it go because I'm super stressed, right? And that's what introverts do, lah. But as far as the mind could see, why this guy had all the skills of extroversion, right? So, Kafong, I hope I answered your question. And let me get to one more question. Let me see. Susanna, you say how to handle those unconscious incompetence. I think the key is to get them out of their unconsciously incompetent mode. How do you do that? It's through education. It's through dialogue. And I didn't talk about this. One of the things as leaders, right? The most powerful weapon we have is this thing called dialogue. We need to pull people aside, and this is where the feedback comes in. You remember I talked about feedback in my previous slide. We need to be very brave to give feedback. I talked about feedback here, right? We need to be very brave to give feedback. And why is this very important? Feedback is very important because when people do wrong, right, we need to say, guys, you could have done this better. Now, of course, many people get upset. Oh, but the guy is good. He's 90% good. That 10%. But if you didn't give that feedback to the guy or girl, right, they will know about that 10%. So our job is to give feedback. Our job is also get feedback. Sometimes we don't get feedback, right? And when you talk, Susanna, with your unconscious incompetence, right? I think it's very important for us to figure out how can I, truly, right, be able to give that kind of a feedback to these folks, right? That enables me to, to be able to truly be able to add value to them and be able to know for them, right, that I'm currently I currently have an unconscious incompetence, right? And I need to move to the next level. Now I've opened up the slides under Hangout. So if you wanna go and download the slides, you go under the handouts and you should be able to download the slides, right? Let me see if there's any more questions. I think I've answered all the questions, right? Let me see. There's a new question. Nope, there's no more new questions. So great. I've answered all the questions. Andrea, I will, go ahead and pass the time back to you. Thanks, everyone. Hopefully, this was insightful and gave you some sort of insights into leadership for the 21st century and the 3 different aspects that we talked about and some of the follow through from there.
All right. Thanks, Roshan. I think I've learned a lot from this session itself, and I'm surprised 1 hour is gone. So thank you, everybody. We hope that you enjoy this session. And right now, I'm going to actually share with you something very interesting and also an offer, a very special offer that we're going to put up. This is actually a digital solution that we have, and it's basically for anybody and everybody who wants to learn and also be guided in that learning, because we are getting a lot of information out there. This information is everywhere. You Google something will pop up and you just continue reading. But with this, Necole, she's here to guide you in a sense that she pulls out quality content for you that is based on your learning engagement. So when you use this app, they will actually use an expert guided pathway that is based on the science, a technology that we are developing called Science of Building Competence. And we have like 52 pathways and weeks that will help you journey in this learning about leadership and being a leader by yourself, and how do you influence everyone else around you as well. So with this, because you have attended this, we are going to push out something called a 10% extra discount. And we hope that you use this to subscribe for this really great app, and use this promo code for an extra 10%. So we used to sell this for $75 for a year, and we have already cut it down to $50 per year, which is a really good investment of your time if you're very interested to learn more and, develop yourself and get ahead. And now with this promo code, you will have extra 10% off just for Roshan. So thank you so much, everyone, for spending your 1 hour and 5 minutes with us. This is the end of the webinar. Have a great day. Take care. Be safe. And for those who are going back to the office, we hope you transition well back into your work. Thank you, everybody. Goodbye.